know that one of, oh, all right, be careful what you say. We are being recorded, okay? All right, I'm gonna start out just a moment by saying a little bit about PFLAG Skagit. And I'm gonna share a screen here. Where would we be without PowerPoints? Here we are. So a little bit about me. My pronouns are he, him. I am currently the president of PFLAG Skagit, but most of what I do is being part of the Speakers Bureau, which is my definite passion. The mission of PFLAG is to educate about, advocate for, and support the LGBTQ plus community. And maybe you don't realize this, but one reason I'm here speaking today in June is that this is the beginning of Pride Month for the LGBTQ plus community. And when I think about Pride and I think about my community, I think about how hard fought it has been to begin to learn how to have pride in who we are as this community. When you think about the word pride and you think about what it means, I mean, think about your own life. What are the things in your life that you are proud of?
Sure.
You're proud of.
Didn't see it on. Okay.
You're proud of maybe your accomplishments. Maybe you're proud of your lineage, the family you came from, or the business accomplishments you've had. Maybe the school you went to. We have a lot of pride in our families. We have a lot of pride in our children. And I'm going to start my talk today by talking about that pride we have in our children. You know, when somebody finds out they're pregnant, one of the first things that happens is everybody zeroes in on, is this going to be a boy or a girl? And the ultrasound happens, and it's a wonderful day when the ultrasound happens, because now you know for sure that you are going to have either a boy or a girl. And it's important because once you know that, then you can begin to tell stories about this child. No. You've told stories about this child from when you first thought about having a family. And this child is going to do all these things. What we find is that most of the time we have kids in order to live out our dreams up until we find out that they just don't do that. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but that's certainly been true in my life. But, you know, any good meeting starts with the invitation to a party. So I want to invite you to a party. And maybe you've been to this kind of party. Maybe you haven't been to this kind of party. If not, you can put it on your list of things to do. But this is after the ultrasound has come. Now, what kind of party is this? If we were in a large room, I would be opening this up for you to give me answers to this. But that's not where we are today. So I'm going to fill in the blank for you. Yes, this is the marvelous gender reveal party. And we have all the family together and everybody's so excited. We're going to announce the gender of this baby. And when we cut into this cake, the color of the cake mix will be either pink or blue. And at this point, we will know what the gender of this child's going to be. So this is fabulous. There's nothing wrong with telling stories about these little people that are coming into our lives. But the problem is when, my slides get ahead of me, is when stories that we tell about our kids become dangerous. This is the backdrop for my talk today, because this is why I'm here today. 41% of our transgender youth will attempt suicide. Many of these kids will succeed. We don't get real good data on that. Another kind of interesting, and particularly when you talk about our cities, if you look at the homeless youth on the streets, 43% of them are our kids, the LGBTQ community. Why? Because they've been rejected. They've been rejected by family. They've been rejected by church. They've been rejected by schools. They've been rejected by their communities. So what we want to do today is I want to educate you about some information that you may not know. One of the things we learned in the gay rights movement was that until people understood that being homosexual is not a choice. It is this deeply held, felt feeling of attraction that everybody kind of is, it's kind of mysterious in a way. And that it's not a choice. Well, when 60% of the polling, 60% of the population of the country shifted to saying that's not a choice, within 5 years, we had gay marriage at the hands of the Supreme Court. That's remarkable. That is a remarkable shift in population opinion. So here we are again, because I'm not saying that people who are homosexual, they're on easy street now, because they're not, and certainly not all across the country. But I will say to you that the focus has now shifted to the transgender community. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it means to be transgender. There's a lot of misunderstanding about terminology around all of this. So we're going to walk our way through it. And I'm going to be fairly graphic, as you can tell by this PowerPoint. And the reason I'm going to be graphic is because we don't have a good understanding of what the difference is between sex and gender. We use them interchangeably, like both of those things mean the same. And I want to just take you away from that for a few moments, because I want to talk about real specifically the difference between sexual anatomy and gender. All right. This won't be new news to you, but when we talk about sexual anatomy, we are talking about external sexual organs and internal sexual organs that make up the sexual reproductive system. And that's what we're referring to, okay? When we talk about sexual orientation and attraction, we're talking about that magical thing in all of us that we recognize when we meet somebody, that we go, oh, wow, bang, that person is interesting to me. If you had to define where it comes from, where it lives in your body, you'd go, I don't know. There's a lot of body parts that get involved in it. But anyway, sexual orientation and attraction, very different thing from your sexual anatomy. They can operate totally independently, friends. Now we get to gender identity. What is gender identity? It's this personal felt sense of one's own gender. Eureka. This may not match your sexual anatomy. And that is what is used to determine what your gender is at the time of birth. You are assigned a gender at the time of birth, but whether that really matches your true sense of gender is another issue entirely. How about gender expression? How do you present your sense of your gender? We tend to look at behavior, clothing, haircut, voice. It all gets rather murky and kind of muddy in a way, because if you look at how we all dress now, it was so much easier when there was this law that said girls should wear dresses and boys should wear pants. When that went away, everything got really confusing, if you know what I mean. And now it's really hard to tell. You can't rely on that. All right. And I'll just note that might be a good thing. So I want to go deeper into what causes the specific sexual anatomy that we have. And we've all had high school biology. If you're like me, it was really simple back in high school biology. There were just kind of two things you needed to know. You're either XX or XY. That 23rd pair of chromosomes that happen at the time of conception get passed by a mom and a pop. XXXY. XX, hey, you're a girl. XY, you're a boy. But then science got its footing here again. And then what we found out was, well, not so fast here, because chromosomes in that 23rd pair line up in all kinds of different ways. At last count, about 19 different combinations of chromosomes that can happen within that 23rd pair of chromosomes. And these all can have something to do with sexual anatomy. Now, at the point of conception, when the chromosomes are doing their thing, we have rapid cell growth in the creation of a fetus. Every cell has DNA. Every cell's DNA determines what that cell's job's going to do. You're going to be a heart, you're going to be a lung, you're going to be part of the brain, and all of this lines up inside the fetus. But then But then there are all these genes that we have. And I'd like you to think of genes as switches because they turn on or they turn off or they partially turn on or off. Every layer of this can have something to do with what sexual anatomy ends up being when all is said and done. I want to introduce you to a very interesting gene. The name of this gene is called the SRY gene. It sits on the Y chromosome. The father throws the Y chromosome, the father throws the SRY gene. This might be good news to some people in this crowd, but if this SRY gene doesn't turn on, there's no male sexual reproductive system that forms, even if this is an XY baby. Let that rattle around your brain just a little bit. You have an XY baby that is a boy. But if this SRY gene isn't on the Y chromosome, that little boy is not going to look like a little boy. The default is female anatomy. So if this gene's not on, the default is female anatomy. Oh, let me not get ahead of myself here. Okay, so I want you to think about this a moment. Just think about this a moment. So someone's pregnant. Sexual anatomy forms within the first 6 to 14 weeks. One of the first systems to be complete is sexual anatomy. So at 6 weeks, before this mom even knows she's pregnant, the sexual anatomy is beginning to be formed. Now imagine for a moment that this little XY baby, boy baby, does not have an SRY gene. So 9 months go by and a baby is born. And when that baby comes out and the baby is presented to mom and pop, the baby deliverer says to mom and pop, "You have a wonderful baby." If you answered girl, you're right. This baby boy has complete female genitalia. You won't know the difference. You won't know the difference. Now, the SRY gene may not be on there, or it may not turn on. If the SRY gene is on there and doesn't turn on, same thing happens. Male sexual anatomy does not form. You have a male fetus that does not have male sexual reproductive system. It looks perfectly female. Now, as if that wasn't enough to throw at you at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that SRY gene might just partially turn on, not turn on all the way. If I could do a show of hands, it wouldn't do any good here, but how many of you have ever heard the term intersex? Intersex is a term that is used to describe an infant that is born with mixed parts of both sexual reproductive systems. Remember the term hermaphrodite? This used to be the term that was used, not used anymore. Now we use the term intersex. But this can describe somebody who has the SRY gene turned partially on. So this little baby may have external genitalia that is completely male, internal genitalia that is completely female. What I'm saying is this baby will be born looking exactly like a male, but have a uterus and ovaries internally. May never know it until they reach adolescence when things go kind of haywire. Typical things aren't going to happen, or when this person begins to want to produce a baby. And this is often when people find out this is true about themselves. They're infertile. They can't get pregnant. They go to the doctor does the exam and says, "Well, I have some interesting news for you. You may look male on the outside, but you do not have complete male reproductive system on the inside." Now you can imagine what that would shake up in terms of one's thinking about oneself. So anyway, this is one way in which you have transgender people, my friends. This is one of the biological precursors to someone being transgender. There are others, and we're going to talk about those. For example, let's not forget hormones. In that 6 to 14 week period when sexual anatomy is developing, testosterone plays a very, very important part because testosterone finishes off the male reproductive system. If the penis is beginning to form, testosterone is critical in completing that development. Now, sometimes testosterone doesn't come on. It doesn't secrete. Why? It's just a difference in nature. It's just what happens. Sometimes testosterone secretes just fine. And there's something that's called a testosterone bath. The brain triggers the little male fetus's body to produce the testosterone bath that is critical for the formation of sexual reproductive system. That may not happen. Or, more interestingly, you may have a fetus that doesn't react to testosterone at all. This is an XY baby. This baby secretes testosterone, but this baby is immune to testosterone. Yeah, it's all physiology, folks. It's cells, it's how cells work. They work differently all the time. And this isn't something abnormal. This isn't something that is so rare we shouldn't be talking about it. This is something that happens in about 1 of every 2,000 births, 2,500 births. It is a known condition. Now, for those of you who recently had babies or about to go down that walk, you won't be told about this in your parenting classes. If this happens in the delivery room, this will all be new news probably to you, except I've told you about it now. So now you do know. So lots of things can happen in this arena, again, of the development of sexual anatomy that influences sexual anatomy. Okay, 6 to 14 weeks. At the end of 14 weeks, anatomy's done. It's either typical or atypical. It's done. And believe me, there are like 40 different atypical development options that are known to medical science at this point in terms of fetal development. All right, there you have it. There's one of the things there's a good summary basically of sexual anatomy. And no, I'm not an MD, but Dr. Google will back me up, I promise you, on all of this. And at the end of my PowerPoint, if people want my PowerPoint, you can have it, and it has tons of references in it. Now let's switch gears a minute and talk about sexual orientation and attraction. Wow, here's another thing in the ABCs of things. Well, we all know what heterosexual means. We all know what homosexual means. Bisexual, meaning, yeah, I'm attracted to both, a male and female. Then there's pansexual. What does that mean? That's mean, to be real blunt with you, what it really means is I don't really care what's in your pants. It doesn't matter to me. I fall in love with a person. I am interested in who this person is, not what they look like from an anatomical point of view. Then we have a whole host of people who identify as asexual, meaning, that attraction thing that everybody talks about? I don't have it. I don't feel it. I don't feel attracted. All my friends are going bonkers over somebody they're attracted. I don't feel it. And this is fascinating. It's a very fascinating option that, again, people are finally talking about as we begin to open up these discussions about the many, 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 many ways in which nature loves diversity. Okay. For those who identify strictly as homosexual, love is not a choice. Who you love is not a choice. If we were in a room together, I would sprinkle magic dust all over all of you and say, tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up and you're going to say, and this magic dust means you are going to be attracted to the exact opposite person from what you have been attracted to your entire life. How would that work out for you? Can you take a guess? Tomorrow morning, would you wake up and be attracted to people of the same sex if you're not now? Of course not. And that's the same thing it used to be when people would say, oh, you're homosexual? Well, just change that. You don't have to be homosexual. Yeah, that got us all really, really far. Now, let's go here. Gender identity. This is being talked about a lot right now. Consider each of these: man, woman, male, female, masculine, feminine. I tend to think of the first two categories, man and male, as talking more about sexual anatomy. If you're a man, you know what your anatomy is. Vice versa, if you're a woman. When you get into masculine and feminine, now we're talking about behavioral characteristics, aren't we? It's like, what do you consider masculine? I love asking groups of people this. What makes you masculine? And I love the ones that say, well, I work with tools, or I wear Carhartts, or, whatever else comes into that. Or what makes you feminine? Oh, I wear makeup. I know lots of women that don't wear makeup. And it's like, where among all of this, where did we get so rigid? Where did we get so rigid in these boxes that we're willing to risk like 43% of our kids? That's the nature of this rigidity, because we are all over the place in terms of our behaviors, And I don't know, I like to tell high school classes, one of my favorite things to do when I talk to high school classes is to talk about a world without gender, the word gender. Poof, it's gone. Because you know what, my friends? We made it up. We created that word and we populated it with characteristics. Poof, it's gone. Now what? Because one of the things that I would say to the women of our population is, how has this gender thing worked out for all of you? What is this term gender really about? And is it time to look pretty closely at these two boxes? Gender is a feeling, a way of experiencing yourself in the world. Imagine, no such thing. We made it up. Where does gender come from? This is fascinating to me. And I don't know if I'll live long enough to see this all come to fruition. But we don't have hardly any research right now into the brain and the role of the brain and gender. But we do know that the part of the brain that has to do with gender doesn't even start developing until halfway through pregnancy. And of course, we're talking about the frontal lobe, that beautiful part of our brain up here that helps us make decisions, that forms our personality, tells us who we are. Of course, this part of the brain has a lot to do with gender. Only this part of the brain may not be talking to the sexual anatomy part of the body. And that's the issue, exactly. Gender may match your assigned sex at birth, or it may not. Your assigned sex at birth is a guess, at best. Even when you've got the ultrasound, even when you've done that darn gender reveal, whatever color the cake is, it may end up not being the gender of your child, or your child may be intersex. Gender identity. Who am I? Assigned sex at birth. You've heard the term cisgender. It's a term used to say, if your sense of yourself as gender matches your anatomy, then you are cisgender, meaning the same. My chemistry people here can probably say a lot more about the use of cis than I can. Transgender. Your assigned sex at birth doesn't match your sexual anatomy, and it doesn't match your gender. Okay, that makes sense. Intersex. Your assigned sex at birth may match your sexual anatomy and or your gender. A number of babies are born with ambiguous genitalia. What do we mean by that? We mean that somewhere in that 6 to 14 months of anatomical development, the actual genitalia did not develop typically. It developed atypically. And what that means usually is that you have a baby that has, either it could be an enlarged clitoris or it could be a small penis. Which is it? Don't know. When cells go to the gonadal area of our bodies during fetal development, they don't have a specific mission. They're just cells. They can be a penis or they can be a vulva. They're both tissue. So what happens if, because of something that goes on during development, the penis is not typically developed, nor is the clitoris typically developed? So what happens? If you're the parent of this baby and this baby is brought in and presented to you and you look at the genitals and you go, what is that? I don't know what that is. And the doctor says, well, that could be a clitoris or that could be a penis. We don't know for sure. Well, let's look at the chromosomes. Okay, you can do that, but it won't answer your question because the chromosomes may be one thing and the gender may be another. So it is not dispositive. But oftentimes people say, how do we fix that? How do we fix that? I don't want my kid looking different than everybody else. So surgeons have an answer. They normalize the genitalia, meaning they'll make their best guess. And their best guess usually is to remove some of the tissue and to create a typical female clitoris. It's not hard to do. Surgeons know how to do it. Can't tell whether the baby was born with that clitoris or whether it was formed surgically, unless there are problems that come up later. So anyway, this baby, the parents will say, yeah, we got you a little girl. Here's a little girl. But you don't know if that's a little girl or not. So a certain percentage of intersex babies end up being transgender because the wrong guess was made when the genitalia was created. And you can see why the default is going to be female genitalia, because creating a male penis is pretty difficult. And surgeons are not good at that, even for trans men. That's another conversation, but it's hard. So as a result, the default is pretty much to create a clitoris and to create a vagina if one is not there. It's major surgery. Non-binary. People identify as non-binary. What does that mean? You don't identify with either gender. Truth be told, this is where, poof, the word gender is gone. So I'm non-binary. What does that mean? It's like, I don't know. I don't feel real male. I don't feel real female. I'm just me. Can I just be me? Is that okay? Gender fluid. Why choose? I might dress more masculine one day. I might dress more feminine the other day. True. That's okay. That's cool. Or what about the word queer? You're hearing that a lot right now. And for those of us of my generation, I always kind of blanch when I hear the word queer. That's a bad word. That's a bad word. And it was used horribly during the Stonewall days and after the Stonewall days. But this generation of kids has reclaimed this word, and they use it to basically say, I don't want to identify with any of it. I don't want to identify with a gender. I'm not going to identify with who I love. Hey, you know, guys, really, when it comes right down to it, there are many ways to be, and there are many ways to love. We're the ones that are uncomfortable with that. Nature loves diversity. There's all kinds of differences out in the world of nature. Remember, this is a test. Sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as. You may quote me on that. It's not my quote. It's Chaz Bono's, and I loved it. Look at this. Look at this baby. Isn't she adorable? We don't have any question, do we, as to what gender this child is? I asked a group last week. There weren't as many as you. And I just said, okay, everybody, girl or boy? Everybody voted girl. This is a girl. This is a girl. Yeah, maybe. What you may not know is that baby right there may be intersex. She may have been born with ambiguous genitalia. She may now have normalized genitalia, but you don't know what her gender is. She may be born with a mixed sexual reproductive system. You don't have a clue because you can't know that. This baby's genitals may have been surgically normalized. Guess may have been wrong. This baby may look entirely like a girl inside and outside, but have the gender identity of being a boy or a gender identity of being neither. As a parent, you may not know where your child comes down on the toy test until that baby is 2 years of age. I'm kind of amazed when I've watched kids, especially my grandkids, I was up close and personal with, just watch them as they choose where they come down on the identity spectrum. I mean, culture imposes all kinds of issues on us about this identity that we talk about. But if you really want to know what a kid's gender identity is, be patient, sit back and watch. And people who had surgeries as intersex people would be happy to tell you to leave these children alone as long as there's nothing physically wrong with them. However, in our country, in every state, it is perfectly legal to alter the genitals at the time of birth. Some people refer to it as genital mutilation. That's an interesting term for it. But at any rate, there is a lot of coming legislation to try and require surgeons to just wait, let the baby have a seat at the table when the baby gets older and can begin to demonstrate gender. We already talked about the number of these things happening. All right, do you feel like this yet? Are you going, some of you, I recognize some of you, and I know you've been to my talk before. You didn't get it the first time, Don Wicks, so I've required you to come back again, all right? I just want you to know that. I don't know how many times you've been here, but we're gonna get it to you. Nature loves diversity. We are the ones that have a problem. Okay, you think you've got it, right? So now what? Now what do you do? Well, I am going to remind you of John from eDask's talk. May have been last month or the month before when he talked to you folks about unconscious bias, because I'm going to pick right up on that thread. We're here today to talk about how do we make our community more welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community. What do we do? Well, one thing we do is just like in the world of racism, we try and identify where our biases come in. We live in a homophobic, transphobic culture. Those of us who are in the LGBTQ community, we have a ton of implicit bias about our own and about ourselves, because you cannot grow up without hearing the messages. Homosexuality is evil. It's a sin. It's an abomination. Being transgender is something we all made up. We're trying to completely ruin the world as we know it. And genders are just what they are. I don't think anybody in this room, in this Zoom meeting today, would overtly say something rude to someone who is trans or gay. But the ways in which we do it subtly are the much more interesting ways. One of my favorite stories, I co-facilitate a group right now for transgender adults. And one of the stories I hear over and over and over again is going to the doctor's office. And you go to the doctor's office, and if you're lucky, your doctor does understand what it means to treat someone who is transgender. But the person at the front desk, they haven't been given the benefit of that. So they walk into the doctor's office. Usually the forms say male or female, no other options. And when the receptionist looks at this person, maybe it's a trans woman in her 50s or 60s, and she did not transition until much later in life. So she may have a 5 o'clock shadow. She may have a wig on. She may have a dress. The receptionist looks up at this person, and the first thing that happens is you break eye contact with that person. It is just as if saying, oh, whoa, I'm not comfortable with you. That's what we talk about when we talk about how do we welcome people into our community who maybe are different than most of us. I will tell you, as I check the email for PFLAG Skagit, cannot tell you how many times we get emails from people who are thinking about moving to Skagit County. They write to PFLAG to say, I have a trans 14-year-old. I have a non-binary kid. What is the community like there? Are we going to be welcome? And That's important, and that's what we're here talking about today, is how do we do that? You know, it's a little different than what gay people used to talk about. You need to tolerate gay people. Tolerating people is not what we're talking about here. You know, what we're talking about is how do we actually welcome people? How do we give signs that Mount Vernon is a place that you can bring your family? We don't care what your family makeup is. We don't care what gender you identify with. There are jobs here for you, and there are people here, there are groups here that will welcome you with arms wide open. Well, how would they know that? I don't know. In the Chamber of Commerce, one of the things I know when the Chamber's offices are open again, maybe they are already, is to have materials from PFLAG Skagit there, so that when somebody new comes looking into the area, you're going to see, hey, we would love to have you come join our organization. How about visible symbols? Do you have a rainbow flag? Do you have a rainbow flag in your place of work? Trust me, people in my community, they are looking everywhere for that. When they walk into your place of business, are there people there that look like them? Are there people there that they think, wow, that person has a family photo and there's two men in that family photo with 3 kids. What the heck? This is what it means to welcome people. Forms. Oh my God. Someday we're going to have this. Someday we're going to have them all uniform. We've made a ton of progress. Doctors' offices, all the places that we go that care about whether you're male or female. How about we just don't ask that? There are ways around that. Really, why do you need to know gender? Why do you need to know what my sexual anatomy is? I don't understand that. Doctors' offices, you need to know what my internal organs are if you're going to send me reminders, but there are better ways to do that than to ask me if I'm male or female. Language. What's your name? How important is your name to you? How important is it? What do you feel like when people get your name wrong or they pronounce it wrong? Do you ever get misgendered? Do you know what that means? That means when people mistake you, in spite of the fact that you are dressed totally like a woman. If you've got a little 5 o'clock shadow here, it's very likely you're going to be misgendered. Some people do it to show disrespect. That does happen. But a lot of people do it because we're so well programmed. I personally am absolutely in love with the pronoun they. I try and use it as much as I can because it's fair. And who cares if it's singular? It's, you know, some of my favorite English teachers have crossed over and been able to say, you know, they makes a lot of sense. They makes a lot of sense. Do you have pronouns when you send emails? If you're not part of my community, we would really appreciate it if you do it, because it shows that you get it and that you understand it. And people in my community that get an email from you and see that are going to go, whoa, this is where I want to do business. This is, and believe me, we are choicy about that very thing. What's the family descriptor? Who's in your family? You got 2 moms, you got 2 dads, you got a mom and a dad who's going through transition. Hey, worse things have happened. It does happen. Is there a place for them in our community? All of you, you're the business community. You set the tone. You could do a world of good by demonstrating some of the things that we're talking about here. And PFLAG is happy to help you. Oh, by the way, we would be just delighted to bring materials by your office. So here you go. What on earth do these transgender variant people want? Good grief. Haven't we suffered enough? I'd like to be seen for who I am. To be treated with respect. Isn't that what everybody wants? That's what everybody wants. To be accorded the dignity that I deserve as a human being, as someone just like you. This is huge to me right here, to be able to belong. It is something that is so part of us. I think it's one of the reasons that we tribe up like we do. We want to be with people in our tribe. And for my community, they have been excluded from the tribe, from so many tribes for so long. And that's one of the things that we at PFLAG take so seriously. is by expanding this notion of tribe, that we allow people who are different from us to come in, and to be. How do we do that as a community? And to be loved. That's pretty basic. So in closing, may I introduce you to Linda, age 5. Later to become Linden. Finally, at the age of 63. Yes, I was a late bloomer. I transitioned at 63 years of age. If you are interested in my story, and PFLAG loves stories, that's what we're all about. The desire to be, this is the point I'm making here. The desire to be one's true self never goes away. How do we support that quest for everyone? And in particular, how do we support the quest for our kids who are trans? How do we make the world safe for these kids? How do we help them belong to our community? And above all, how do we be proud of them? How as parents, when parents say, my kid just came out as transgender, and the world makes it such a big deal, and the world makes it so hard. And it's hard for a parent to say, my kid's trans, I'm so proud of them. And yet every time I hear a parent say that, believe me, it warms my heart. And it gives me hope. And it gives me hope for these kids right now who are willing to stand up and say, this is who I am. This is who I am. Be proud of me because I deserve it. That's a whole nother presentation we could do, talking about trans children for another time. Anyway, if you're interested in my story, my good friend John Bowie at Transmedia Vision USA called me a while back and said, I'd like to record your story. And he and I sat down and he did. We recorded my story. And if you want to know about me and about my journey, it's there. I don't tell this story. I don't tell my story as a way to boost my ego. That's not what this is about. I tell my story to say that I was one of those kids, these kids right now, who knew so early on and who understood so early on, and who was one of those kids who was suicidal throughout adolescence, really struggled, and throughout my early adulthood. So that's who this is all about. How do we make the world safer for them? That's my mission today. I love where I live. I have lived in Marble Mount, eastern Skagit County, for 35 years. I transitioned up here in eastern Skagit County. Everybody knew me as Linda. And my friends were supportive. The community members were amazing. And I want to give that gift to as many people I can, because I can never repay that debt of gratitude to the people who have been so wonderful to me in my own process. That's what I got, folks.